Okay, so I chose to do the chapter on lying, and I believe that's chapter 4. And I was really intrigued by it and the fact that it was in this book. The reason I was intrigued by it was for 2 reasons, and the first is that my younger sister, who's turning 16 in August, is notorious for lying, or I'm just really aware of it because I'm older than her by about 6 years, and so I've watched her in these phases of lying her whole life, and it's normal, but I was really interested in this chapter. And then the other reason I was interested in it because the first, fact that I was ever told about lying was that good kids are more likely to lie or cheat than bad kids because they're trying to maintain this reputation that they're good, and bad kids are less likely because that behavior is expected of them. But I don't see any of that in this chapter, but that had been my impression of lying and cheating previously. So for this chapter, Dr. Victoria Talwar talks about some experience she's done and some statistics she has gathered about lying. So the first experiment she does is involves 2 adults who are a married couple, and they are to observe a couple of multiple kids, and each one is either telling the truth or telling a lie as they tell this story, and they don't know if it's true or if they're lying, and so they have to determine if they're telling the truth or if they're lying. And it's really hard to tell, and they're noticing that they really have no idea, and they were only able to guess right a couple of times, and they were really shocked. And so ultimately what we gather from this is that we don't know when kids are lying or telling the truth, whether you're the parent or their teacher. And then the second experiment Dr. Talwar does is involves a parent who's absolutely sure that his kid does not lie, and that if he does lie, he would be very shocked and wouldn't believe it. So the experiment goes that Nick and an interviewer go into this room, and Nick faces a wall, and the interviewer is going to make noises with objects, and Nick has to guess what object it is or what it is that's making that noise. And Nick gets the first couple right, and he's doing really good, and he asks if it's going to keep getting harder, and the interviewer doesn't really say, but the interviewer then gets to a really challenging one, and so she places a greeting card that makes a song and then puts a soccer ball on top, and so obviously the soccer ball doesn't make any sort of noise, but this greeting card does, and so Nick cannot guess what it is. He is really struggling, and so the interviewer at this time goes, okay, well, I think I left something in the other room, I'm gonna go grab it, and then tells Nick not to peek. And then Nick doesn't, but he is very tempted, so he's looking over his shoulder and then looking back, and then he finally peeks, and he does it really quick. He just looks really fast, and then he looks back at the wall, and he sees that it was the soccer ball. And as soon as the interviewer comes back in, he's like, it was a soccer ball. But of course, he then realizes, he couldn't have known that quickly, and so he tries to recover. And so, I'm just going to quote some of the things he comes up with to explain why he thinks it's a soccer ball. So, he knew he needed a plausible answer, but his first attempt wasn't close. With a perfectly straight face, he said, the music had sounded like a ball. Hunting for a better answer, but not getting any closer to it, he added, the ball sounded black and white. His face gave no outward indication that he realized this made no sense, but he kept on talking as if he felt he needed something better. Then Nick said that the music sounded like the soccer balls he played with at school. They squeaked. He nodded. This was the good one to go with, and then further explained that music sounded like the squeak he heard when he kicked a ball. To emphasize this, his winning point, he brushed his hand against the side of the toy ball as if to demonstrate the way his foot kicking the side of the ball produces a squeaking sound. And the kicker is that what they gather from this experiment is definitely something I saw evolve in my younger sister. So this experiment was not just a test to see if children cheat and lie under temptation. It's also designed to test children's ability to extend a lie, offering plausible explanations and avoiding the scientists call leakage, or inconsistencies that reveal the lie for what it is. So for instance, like my little sister, we're not supposed to date until we're 16, but she would have, like secret boyfriends holding hands in the hallway or whatever, and a lot of them lived in our neighborhood, and so she would say, oh, I'm going for a jog, and then meet them at the park, and that happened all the time. So I just thought that result was really interesting, and that you can prove that, and that is something that we see going on in children. So further down, Tawar explains they're kind of like, basically how I see it, like an evolution of lying in kids. When children first begin lying, they lie to avoid punishment, and because of that, they lie indiscriminately, whenever punishment seems to be a possibility. A 3-year-old will say, I didn't hit my sister, even though a parent witnessed the child hit her sibling. A 6-year-old won't make that mistake. She'll lie only about a punch that occurred when the parent was out of the room. By the time the child reaches school age, her reasons for lying are more complex. Punishment is primarily a catalyst for lying, but as kids develop empathy and become more aware of social lying, social relations, they start to consider others when they lie. They may lie to spare friends' feelings. In grade school, said Tawar, secret keeping becomes an important part of friendship, and so lying may be part of that. Lying also becomes a way to increase a child's power and sense of control by manipulating friends with teasing, by bragging to assert his status, and by learning that he can fool his parents. Thrown into elementary school, many kids begin lying to their peers as a coping mechanism. It's a way to vent frustration or get attention. They might be attempting to compensate, feeling they're slipping behind their peers. Any sudden spate of lying or dramatic increase in lying is a sign that something has changed in that child's life in a way that troubles him. Lying is a symptom, often a bigger problem behavior, explained Tawar. It's a strategy to keep themselves afloat. And so I thought this was really accurate just in what I saw with my little sister. And it's just so interesting that we can keep track of that and notice that these things are happening. So it gets a little bit more interesting in that it's very difficult to influence whether or not our kids are going to lie, as students or our own children. And what is there, if there's anything we can do about it. So one of the things that I thought was interesting was with that same experiment involving Nick and the sound of the objects, was that when they were told a short story before, it impacted whether or not they chose to peek. So one of the stories was The Boy Who Cried Wolf, and then the other one was George Washington and the Cherry Tree. Now, if they were told The Boy Who Cried Wolf, where there's a serious consequence for lying, it actually didn't decrease lying at all. But when they were told of George Washington and the Cherry Tree, in which young George confesses to his father that he chopped down the prize tree with his new hatchet, and the story ends with his father's reply, George, I'm glad that you cut down that cherry tree after all. Hearing you tell the truth is better than if I had 1,000 cherry trees. And that one, reduced lying 75% in boys and 50% in girls. And so I think we just have to watch how we teach these lessons about lying. But there are also some really interesting statistics to finish up that Tawar shares about some questions she asked young children. When asked if lies are always wrong, 92% of 5-year-olds say yes. And when asked why lies are wrong, most say the problem with lying is you get punished for it. In that sense, young kids process the risk of lying by considering only their own self-protection. It takes years for the children to understand lying on a more sophisticated moral ground. It isn't until age 11 that the majority demonstrate awareness of its harm to others. At that point, 48% say the problem with lying is that it destroys trust, and 22% say it carries guilt. Even then, a third still say the problem with lying is being punished. So, to summarize, children understand what lying is, and they know what they're doing when they're lying. The purpose of lying only evolves a little bit, and ultimately they just get better at lying. And so I think that we just need to watch how we teach about lying and how we don't recommend lying and what we think about that. But ultimately, kids are going to lie, and I think this chapter could have done a better job of saying how do we fix that, or is there something else we could do other than just the fact that, yep, they're gonna lie to you and there's nothing you can do about it. But I think most of us turn out okay. So it was just a really interesting chapter to read, and I was just so surprised that you could keep track of that.